Hey everybody, I'm ECAbrams, and today in the vlog we're going to talk about some in-camera things you can do to get that lo-fi look for your footage, because as they say, if you don't have good footage coming in, you won't have quality products coming out. Actually, we usually simplify it to just say in out, but I'm sure you'll hear that enough in your career that you don't need me to keep telling it at you. So all this month of Lo-Fi July, we've been talking about the lo-fi aesthetic, and this relies heavily on having decent footage coming into your projects. Because if you want to show off how authentic and original and interesting things are, well, you really do need to be capturing good, authentic, high-fidelity footage that you're not going to get processed down. So the first thing I want to show you is how on digital SLRs you need to tweak the settings of your camera to prevent it from processing things unintentionally. By default, all cameras process images. So basically they take in raw information and then they dumb it down to where you can actually use it. So for our purposes, we need to take, in my case, a Canon 60D, tweak its settings so that it doesn't process this as much. Okay, so we're using the Canon 60D, which is my daily camera around here. Just turn this thing on. And what we want to do is remove the compression that the camera's doing. So we're going to go into the settings here and just make sure we're on movie mode, so we're affecting the movie settings. And we just hit the menu button here, and then we go through. We want to find picture style, and this is where we're going to change that compression. So you're going to use one of the user-defined presets here and just go into that, and we're going to adjust it from being picture style standard to starting off with the neutral preset, and this just affects how it affects images. We're going to take down the contrast to be affecting 0 of the contrast, and take the saturation down 1 point. So what this does is it removes that contrast and saturation change that the camera's built-in processing is going to put into this. So it's actually recommended that you use this setting for all of your work with Canon cameras. Now I know for Nikon and for other cameras it's going to be totally different, and for other Canons in the same line it's going to be totally different too. So just kind of be aware and look for this kind of setup for your digital SLR. And I don't know if some point-and-shoots can do it, but I know in general you always want to have the highest manual control and you want to take away as much processing as you can. So hopefully that helps, and let's go on to the next topic. I'm tired of playing this camera. One of the other parts about this aesthetic that we want to look at is the depth of field, or the shallow depth of field that people often employ when filming. So shallow depth of field is usually intended for things like portraits, where you want to isolate the subject or the foreground matter or the thing that's in focus, the focus of the piece, by making it the only thing that's in focus. So all foreground elements are not, they're all blurry, and all background elements, those are blurry too. So right now I'm shooting this on a prime lens, and it has at most f2 for its aperture size, and aperture size is going to determine that depth of field. So think of depth of field like this. It's like a curve, okay? And this curve at its peak is totally in focus. And the shape of this curve is going to be determined by the properties and the physical properties of your lens. So if you have a lens that's totally open, so that would be f1, or the largest 100% large that that opening can be, it's going to be letting the most light in. So it's going to be super bright, and it's also going to have a very shallow depth of field, which means there is not a lot of play in between where something is going to be in focus or out of focus. And you can change where that is in terms of how deep it is by adjusting the focus ring. That's what that does. It's saying at what distance is that focal plane set. Now, when you start to squeeze down the aperture to something like an f8, which, hold on, let me just do that for you now. So we're at f2 right now. You notice how bright everything is? Now we're going to just click up one value at a time. So everything's getting darker, and you can even notice just on my face that more of it is getting into focus. So from the nose all the way to the ear, at f2, that focal plane is very narrow. So you can only have so much of an image in focus, and as it starts to get wider, more things get in focus. But as you can see, the trade-off is that things do get darker, so you have to adjust your shutter speed, you have to adjust your ISO, or you have to bring in more light. But in general, for this kind of look, you want to be able to make sure you control what is in focus. Usually the aesthetic relies on things that have a large aperture, so we're going to be sticking with things that are, below f8, for example. But, it really depends on what you're shooting out there, and depending on what your subject matter is, you'll want to get all of that subject matter in focus. But for this aesthetic, you can keep it down at an f2 or a low number, just because that's the style. You know, the style is everything's a portrait. If it's a photo of your food, it's a portrait of that food. Or if it's a picture of your shoes, it's a portrait of those shoes, because only the object in question is what is being focused on. Now, this also harkens back to the olden days when the only type of lens they had available was either full open, full closed. So it was basically like a cylinder. Optics were not that good. So that's why we use the depth of field in this aesthetic. Oh yeah, and you can do like rack focus or whatever if you're into that kind of thing. So rack focus is just when you twist the focal ring there and bring it in and out of focus. People think that looks really cool, and you'll notice that every student film you've ever seen uses rack focus either in the beginning or the end. And I guess the next thing I want to talk about, since we're talking about fidelity, is the idea of raw footage. Now, in general, raw footage, which is the kind of thing we were faking by dumbing down the compression settings of the camera, is that we're capturing 100% of the image. So raw is basically we're taking all the information from the sensor, and this is sort of a very expensive process. So you'll see cameras that can do this, like the Red Epic, cost about as much as a small car, or at least a decent car. So it's a pretty pricey procedure. There are ways you can get raw inputs, even with the Canon that I'm using right here. There's a third-party firmware called Magic Lantern that you might want to check out, though sometimes third-party things can harm your camera, but I think its latest update allows for raw footage on some things, and it's getting closer to the consumer level all the time. For example, the Blackmagic camera allows for raw inputs, and the GoPro even, $400 camera, or even less depending on the version, shoots ProTune RAW, so it's actually raw footage coming in. And the advantages of raw footage are that it captures more details in both the shadows and the highlights, so you have more to play with when you color grade and color correct your footage. It's a much more sophisticated type of technology. The files are gigantic, but you have so much more detail to capture on the digital devices. This is trying to mimic what old film footage did. You'll find that even reprints of film are way better than some digital prints of film, just because there was so much chemical detail that was being put into those little panels. And we're still trying to sort of catch up, but I think we've sort of gotten it. You know, the 4K kind of barrier is pretty close, and raw 4K would be, I guess, the ideal. But for the consumer level people, if you want to get raw type things, you do have to do that firmware thing, or like I said, just get a GoPro and enjoy that. It's pretty great. I can't wait until there's an app on the iPhone that captures raw video on iPhones. I'm sure someone is working on it if it doesn't already exist. Anyway, this is ECAbrams, and this has been some in-camera tricks to get you that lo-fi look to your footage. Coming up in the next tutorial, we're going to look at color grading, color correcting, and that kind of thing, so it'll be good to have better footage to work with, or at least footage closer to mine to work with, which is okay. There's new tutorials and new vlogs here every week, and we are currently in Lo-Fi July. If you don't see something you like, check out the older tutorials, and subscribe anyway, because there's going to be new stuff that happens all the time. So it's definitely something you should check out if you're into After Effects and motion graphics. You should park it right here, because new tutorials come in every week. And check out evanabrams.com for things you can download and project files and cool stuff. And I think that's enough self-promotion, so go film some stuff out there, and I will see you next week. Thanks a lot for watching, and have a nice day.